Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ok Xoomer. I'm your host, Aaron Lichtig, Xometry guy and former Jeopardy champion. And I'm here today with Eliana Fu. Now, Eliana is a senior engineer in additive technologies at Relativity Space out in California. Eliana, after working extensively in traditional manufacturing with TimeEd and SpaceX, she turned her attention over to additive manufacturing and joined Relativity Space. And that company is trying to be the first company to fully 3D print an entire rocket, which is pretty cool. We'll talk some more about that. And Eliana is also an ambassador for Women in 3D Printing in Los Angeles. So welcome, Eliana. Thanks for joining.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And you can just call me Ellie if it makes it easier.
All right, I will do that. So what got you interested in additive manufacturing in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually am a material scientist, and I did my master's and PhD at Imperial College in London. So you probably can tell from my accent that I grew up in UK. But I always learned traditional metalworking. So basically forged product metallurgy, sheet, plate, bar, billet, ingot stuff with a focus on titanium. So that's the only thing that I ever knew. I worked in Sheffield, UK for some time, working for a ring roller called Firth Rixson, which was taken over by a bunch of other companies, including, I think, Arconic. And so I only ever knew how to make metal products the old-fashioned way, you know. And when I was working at TimeEd in Henderson, Nevada, which is, by the way, the biggest producer of titanium in the US, I found that more and more of my customers were asking for feedstock for 3D printing or for AM. And I was like, what's that? I should find out about that. And then also what I noticed is more and more jobs for forged product metallurgists were shrinking. And then the job scene for additive engineers was increasing. So I was like, yeah, I should definitely find out more about that. So during my time at TimeEd and actually at SpaceX, I worked a lot with basically vendors and my internal customers who were design engineers at SpaceX, for example, on finding feedstocks for 3D printing. So that would be metal powder, and then at Relativity also wire. And then what I also found out that for metallics, it's the same people who make the feedstock for 3D printing that make billet, bar, sheet, plate, coil, and ingot. So it's kind of the same people that I used to know, but a different division. And so that's been really cool, just getting to know that industry and finding out where the different manufacturing plants are and who's making what and who specializes in which material and for which process, because there are all different kinds of additive processes that we know of.
And at Relativity Space, you're trying to 3D print the first fully 3D printed rocket. How does that work?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. If you notice, there are lots of new companies popping up in the space and space exploration area. And it's not just us, there's lots of other small rocket ship companies, and they're growing. And the number of parts that they're 3D printing is also growing. So it's almost impossible to find an aerospace, whether they're commercial, military, or space exploration, that don't have 3D printed parts these days. But we're the only ones who said we want to fully 3D print the whole thing, or at this moment in time, as much that is feasible and what makes sense. So everybody knows there are some materials that even can't be 3D printed because the feedstock's not available, or the process for remelting and solidification rapidly is not also available. So we have to pick and choose what are the big ticket items that are going to get us to first flight. So that will be for us, the engines, the barrel of the rocket, the fuel tank, the fairing, things like that, and some other structures, support structures that hold the engines in place. And there might even be some ground systems for our hot fire stand for our engines, or even on the pad when we eventually take off. So there are a whole bunch of things. We even use plastic printers to do widgets or bits and pieces and things that just help us on the daily, you know?
Awesome. And so during the COVID epidemic, you were also involved with some really interesting work in the fight against the disease.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. So when COVID started, our company was pretty fast. We went into lockdown and work from home before the rest of California, basically. But what it also meant is that we had time to also make sure that our supply chains were stable and everyone else was, wrapped up pretty well. And what we discovered pretty quickly was that people, especially at that time of the pandemic, in Italy and places like that, the disease was really taking off. And so we read that people were 3D printing ventilator parts or spare parts and things like that. And we thought, wow, we should get involved somehow. But individual companies, not everybody's set up to do that kind of plastic printing, especially like us, we're focused on metallics. But what we can do is connect people. So for example, we reached out to the mayor of Los Angeles office to see what we could do to help. And then actually Mayor Garcetti has a task force for COVID task force. And he was like, oh, let's connect people who are in the hospitals or the first responders who need things like face shields. And so we got all those guys together with people who actually have plastic 3D printers or have expertise with designing files or parts. So for example, this one is printed by our LA ambassador, Lindsay Zindrowski, and she's printed these head parts. And then these sort of acetate sheets just get punched in. And so it's just a matter of assembly and sending this out. But she's donated over 500 of these to clinics and first responders and so forth. And so that's pretty cool. So that's something that we could still participate in, helping the community or giving back to the community while not being able to fully 3D print these kind of parts because our metallic printers are 25 foot tall, so we do what we can where it makes sense.
That's great, and that's an awesome way to turn your interest and the other members of the Women in 3D Printing Group's interest into something very, very positive.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, what excites you most about being in the world of 3D printing, and kind of where do you think things are headed in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think 3D printing, like almost every school kid that you talk to these days, they've seen or touched or they've used a 3D printer. It's incredible how it's in the mainstream now. People do hobbies and crafts or make their own jewelry or make their own bits and pieces at home. That's fantastic. I mean, and you've heard stories about in the fight against COVID of like teenage kids 3D printing face shields and sending those out, or HP also had a no-touch door handle where you could print a plastic part that you'd put this part of your arm into and then open a door handle using your elbow so that you don't physically touch the door handle. So that's pretty awesome. So I think that we're going to see more of that becoming more and more mainstream. We're going to see things like when consumer products go back to normal, I believe that we're going to see things like customized shoes and stuff like that. Like say you wanted a really nice pair of basketball shoes, you can walk into a unnamed Nike store or whatever, have your feet measured, go away, do your shopping, and then when you come back, your shoes are ready for you to pick up. I think we're going to start seeing more and more customization of those kind of like everyday things that we take for granted. And we'll see more of that. While aerospace is really pushing, I think, the uptake of high-tech 3D printed parts. So in commercial aerospace, aviation, and space exploration, we'll continue to see more and more of that.
Excellent. So I'm very curious about your career journey, how you got from the UK to Nevada to LA. How did that all kind of come together?
Yeah, well, so I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about gender politics, but as a female in working in steel mill, sometimes some people are a bit old school, and obviously those attitudes are changing. But yeah, there weren't a lot of opportunities for me at the time with the kind of mentality that was back in the day. So I really thought, like, what interests me? Where can I add value to an organization? And what do I have to do to make myself more amenable to finding those jobs? And so I was doing a lot of research, taking classes. Even with a PhD, I can still take a class, so I'm not above learning new skills. And I think that as a job seeker in the workforce, you have to be adaptable, keep changing, keep learning, and then follow the trends of where things are going, especially for markets like titanium, where commercial aerospace is 75% of the world's consumption of titanium. That means that if you're going to follow those kind of market trends, you better make sure that you keep up with the latest technology, changes in alloy chemistry, and then processes, how you're going to actually process that material. That's one material, for example. There are a whole bunch of different materials which are even in the non-metallics that you should keep up with. So I think that's a good example to constantly remind you to keep challenging yourself and to keep learning and growing as a person.
Thanks, Eliana. That's great advice. And thank you for joining the show today. It's been really great to have you on.
Yeah, no problem. And, you know, I think if people want to get started, I would say if there's any advice I would give to young people who want to get started in 3D printing as a career or in the industry, honestly, try and join groups. I mean, we can't physically go to meetings these days because of physical distancing. But I'm sure when COVID is all over, there's going to be plenty of chances for meetups and things like that. There are loads of people doing hobby crafts, 3D printing. Really try and get as much hands-on experience as you can, because that's a great way to learn, even by messing things up. And, you know, I have a friend who, 7-year-old kid, wanted to buy a 3D printer, didn't have a lot of money, but wanted just to learn to make toys and things like that. And then he's printing all kinds of cool, neat things. The little sister wants to print rings and jewelry and plastics. And so that's all cool, because that stimulates their imagination and it gets them more like the idea that you can be part of it and you can do it too.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And thanks again for joining today. This has been another episode of OK Zoomer. We'll be back with another one in a couple days. Take care, everybody.